All right, guys, welcome back to our study in the book of Daniel. The last time we were here, we were in chapter 6, looking at that issue of Daniel in the lion's den. And basically, what we had was Darius coming to power. Remember, Babylon is now conquered and is now under the Medes and the Persian. And here is Darius the Mede coming into power. And so he wants to set up the kingdom in a way that is most efficient. So he chooses 120 satraps and 3 commissioners or governors over these particular men, and he set Daniel over as one of these 3 commissioners. So there were basically 40 satraps to each commissioner. That's probably what the idea is. And now, after looking at Daniel, we already know about Daniel in his wisdom, his intelligence, and also how God had blessed him supernaturally, not only in those spiritual abilities, but in governance. Darius took note of him and wanted to set him over the entire kingdom. Now, this caused a problem, namely jealousy, with the 2 other commissioners / governors, if you'll let me say it that way. And so they devised a plan against Daniel to try to have Daniel removed, really not just simply removed, but even destroyed. So they went to the king and said, "King, I tell you what you do, make an edict, make an ordinance that no one can pray or worship any other gods besides you yourself." And we talked about all of those spiritual significant issues concerning that, this one man trying to picture himself as a god. But nevertheless, the king, Darius, thought that was a good thing to do, but he didn't realize that they were deceiving him. But nevertheless, he signed the ordinance, and the key thing that we talked about was the ordinance of the Medes and Persians that cannot be changed, neither by the king. The king cannot overrule an ordinance once it has lawfully been executed. But anyway, so in doing that, these men came and found Daniel praying as Daniel would normally do, even after Daniel knew that this particular edict was signed. Because what? They knew they couldn't come after him because of his execution of his authorities as a governing official. Daniel was loyal, Daniel was truthful, and Daniel did his job. So they couldn't do that, but they knew they could come after him with respect to the worship of his God. But anyway, backing up once more. So what did they do? They found Daniel praying at the normal hour, which meant they were watching him all of the time. After bringing Daniel in before the king, they came to the king and said to the king, "You signed this ordinance." The king was very disappointed, and he tried to free Daniel, but nevertheless, he could not. Remember the laws of the Medes and the Persians that cannot be changed or overruled even by the king. So therefore, the king resigned to send Daniel to the lion's den. Daniel was there. The king had hope. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He had no music that night. But nevertheless, he was still believing and hoping that Daniel's God, that Daniel loyally served, would serve him. The next morning, the king got up, hurried to where Daniel was, found Daniel to be alive. After that, the king's anger was then vented toward those who had deceived him, those 2 governing officials, the commissioners, and he had them, their wives, their children thrown into the lion's den, and they died there. And thus the king wrote a letter that all men and people of his kingdom should not speak a word against the God of Daniel. All right, with that, and the whole point of all of that, remember the theme was that in Daniel chapter 6, God is faithful towards those who are faithful and loyal to him. All right, now getting into chapter 7. Chapter 7, we basically have a type of retelling with respect to a vision or a dream that Daniel has from the vision of Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar had a vision of this great figure. It was a figure of a man, head of gold that represented Babylon, and then the arms of silver that represented the Medes and the Persians, and then the abdominal cavity of bronze that represented Greece, and then the legs of iron that represented Rome, and then the iron mixed with the clay, the 10 toes that represented the final 10 kingdoms. And so we have a reiteration of this vision to Daniel. Interesting that Daniel himself didn't understand the vision. That's because if God doesn't give you understanding, you won't have understanding. God had to give Daniel understanding of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And so now also too, God is giving Daniel a dream, and Daniel has to have interpretation of this dream through a messenger, an angel messenger. In other words, God has to give the correct interpretation of the dream. All right. Now, so we have basically a reiteration of this in chapter 9, except instead of having the figurine of a man, as we described for Nebuchadnezzar's dream, it will be the images of 4 beasts. And these beasts will represent the consecutive kingdoms that will come about. So there is a chronological order concerning the beasts that will be spoken of in Daniel. That is, first he begins with this great lion, and we'll talk about all of that. And then he ends with an indescript, a Mongol type of a beast, which the beast we'll find in Revelation chapter 13 will be a combination of all of these other beasts into one specific animal. But we'll talk about that. But the point is, one beast rises after another, depicting one kingdom rising after another kingdom. And it all speaks eschatologically. That is, it speaks of the kingdoms, namely the kingdoms of the Gentiles. Remember, we talked about this very early in the book of Daniel. It all depicts, let me back up so we can refresh your memory. All of these different kingdoms speaks of the times to the which the Gentile kingdoms have authority over, influence over the Jewish people or the nation of Israel until the coming of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And when we say the coming of the kingdom of Jesus Christ, we're referring to the second advent, not his first advent. The first advent, he had to pay the price for sin. But in the second advent, Jesus returns as the king and ruler of all of the earth. And so all of these kingdoms that we have been speaking of, first in the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, and now in Daniel chapter 7, in these beasts that we will have in the dream of Daniel, it just simply speaks of the different Gentile kingdoms that will rise during the time, coming or approaching the time of the return of Jesus Christ. All right. So now, before we get into chapter 7, there is a very much, you'll see this too with the fourth and the final beast. We'll talk about that. This is symbolic of the Antichrist. So Revelation chapter 13 will walk hand in hand, especially the first half of the chapter. You'll see the rise of the Antichrist, talking about this great beast. And notice in Revelation 13, I believe it's in verses 2 and 3, in the descriptions of the beast, of Revelation 13 will have similar descriptions of the beast that we'll talk about in Daniel chapter 7. That is, the body of a leopard, the feet of a bear, and the face and the mouth of a lion. All of these are the beasts of Daniel chapter 7, which says that it is a combination. That's what we call an indescript or a mongrel type of an animal. Indescript beast, because it is a combination of all of those kingdoms. Okay. But anyway, let's just go into Daniel chapter 7. It is very apocalyptic, in a vision, in a dream, and the literature, it's one that has to be interpreted. So let me just say it this way. So what I'm going to do, as I've been doing for all of Daniel, I'm going to read through the text, but I'll be offering commentary along the way. I'm going to break into certain parts of it, offer commentary so that we can interpret Daniel's vision. Now, I'm going to do the interpretation, more of it, in the first part of the retelling of the vision. So by the time we get to the end of chapter 7, when the angel interprets the vision for Daniel, but the angel is not going to give all of the interpretation, but he will give the fundamental interpretation, okay? So by the time we get to the end, we'll basically be reading and kind of rehashing some of the things that I would have already talked about. But the whole point of it all is it begins with the kingdoms of the Gentiles, the times when the Gentiles rule basically the world, the kingdoms of the world, up until the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. So what is going to actually end, as you'll see, and I'm doing too much talking before I get there, but just allow me this latitude. The coming of the Antichrist, which will be the fourth beast with that little horn that comes out of the fourth beast, that great horn, the little horn that will become great. What it will end is in Revelation chapters 19 and 20. In Revelation chapter 19 and 20, I tell you what, enough. I'll just explain that when we get there, okay? Enough of that overview. So let's just get simply into chapter 7 and see if we can try to keep this under an hour. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay on his bed. Then he wrote the dream down and related the following summary of it. All right. So now we are catapulted back in time. All right. Remember, the last time we were here in Daniel chapter 6, we were in the reign of Darius the Mede, who had taken over the kingdom from Belshazzar. Remember, Belshazzar was that final king, descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, with the handwriting on the wall, numbered, found wanting and weighed in the balance. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Those were the words. Remember that? And thus the kingdom was moved, and Persia under Darius, the Medes and the Persians, came to power. But now we're going back as Daniel is now recounting again. So we see that these particular writings of Daniel are grouped thematically. They are grouped thematically and not necessarily chronologically. But anyway, so let's go back to where we are now here with Belshazzar. So we are in the first year of Belshazzar's reign, which was somewhere about 553 BC. So he went back about 14 years backwards, okay? And then he said that it is Daniel who's having dreams and visions on his bed, and he is going to relate to us, chapter 7, the summary of this thing. Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, there is a lot of symbolism in Daniel chapter 7, and so we'll talk about that. So in this vision that he had in a dream at night, he saw the four winds of heaven. This is depicting the providence and divine activity of God. Providence and divine activity of God. Four winds stirring of heaven upon the great sea. Now, the great sea is typically the Mediterranean Sea. However, symbolically, it also speaks for humanity. That is, in the providence of God, he was working in or amongst humanity. Okay, this is what's going on in the human race. And four great beasts were coming from the sea, different from one another. Now he talks about the beasts, right? And the beasts, as we said, will be representatives of the kingdoms. And we've already talked about that from the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. The first was like a lion and had wings of eagle. And also interesting to note here that both the lion and eagles, were symbols of Babylon. And so therefore we'll have a depiction here concerning the kingdom of Babylon, the lion with the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was given to it. So then he sees the lion being morphed or transformed into a man. It goes from a lion, the wings are now gone, the animal features are now gone, and it appears to be a man. This seems to be a depiction of what took place with Nebuchadnezzar. Remember when Nebuchadnezzar had this psychotic episode that lasted for 7 years, to the which he thought he was an animal. And then after that humbling experience that he received from God, he was restored back to his sanity, and he was also restored back to power. And this seems to be a spiritual picture of this great lion with the wings. And notice these lion and an eagle, they are as like imperial type creatures. They are of the birds, the eagle is what? The greatest. Of the animal kingdom, the lion is depicted as one of the greatest animals in the lion kingdom. And thus we can see the depiction here of Babylon, okay? And even symbolizing Nebuchadnezzar with the stripping of the wings and then the mind being given back to him as the mind of a man. And behold, 5, another beast, a second one resembling a bear. Now, this is the Medes and the Persians, okay? The bear symbolized the kingdom of the Medes and the Persian, the next empire. Remember, we've already talked about Darius. Remember how Darius came in with Ukbaru? We talked about all of that in the previous chapter, the handwriting on the wall. But this is the successive kingdom that is arising after Babylon, namely the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, being symbolized here as a great bear. And it was raised up on one side, and this symbolizes the dominance of Persia. Even though Mede and Persia, they came in together, right? They conquered together. However, the Persians rose to dominance. And 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. This rib in the mouth simply is the conquering of other nations. This could be the Assyrians, representative of the Assyrians, or the Babylonians, or Egypt. However, it could possibly be the Lydia, Egypt, and Babylon. But nevertheless, the three ribs are indication of 3 great nations that the Persians, Medes and the Persians, have conquered. And thus they said to it, arise, devour much meat. And now we can also see too, remember we said one of the themes in the book of Daniel is how God is sovereign over the affairs of men. That is, you can see the providential working of God in the affairs of men. So whatever this bear is doing, notice the bear received the command. These nations are not just simply acting in and out of self-will, but they are accomplishing the will of God. All right. And I don't want to say much about that because that's another subject altogether that we can talk about. But again, there is that underlying inferences here of how God is in control. Notice, what did it say earlier? The 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. That is, these things are happening because God is not simply knowing they will happen. God is causing them to happen. All right. So let's continue from the bear. So we see the devouring of much meat, that's simply to conquering other nations. Verse 6, after this I kept looking, and behold, another one like a leopard. Now this is Greece. Basically Greece that was brought into its great dominance under Alexander the Great. A leopard which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. Now, the thing that is interesting too is, first, the leopard is one of the fastest animals on land. I don't know if there's an animal that can run faster than a leopard. But also too, by giving wings, it makes it even faster. But instead of having just 2 wings, he has 4 wings. That's amazing, which shows the animal is extremely fast, being a leopard with 4 wings. What? The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given it. again, and this speaks basically, what is it? Basically from 334 to something like 330 BC, how rapidly Alexander the Great conquered the world, not all of the world, but the world at that time, how fast he conquered the world. All right. The four heads of the beast that we see on the leopard is at the death of Alexander. And the Bible is going to really explore this as we move into chapter 8. But anyway, the four heads of the leopard represents the four generals of Alexander. When Alexander the Great died, he didn't have a son who would inherit his kingdom, the great expanse of the Greek kingdom. So the four generals basically had to, if you let me say, fight and conquer. And so it was divided. After the death of Alexander the Great, his kingdom was divided by those four generals into four parts that represent here the four heads. And again, notice that inference. Dominion was given it. Dominion, that is power, authority to execute, rule, and dominion, given by whom? By God. That's that inference that's constantly being made. The four winds. It is by the providence of God. These nations rise, these kingdoms rise, because God has caused these things to happen. Verse 7. After this, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast. The fourth beast is Rome. And then it is from the fourth beast, Rome, remember, of iron. Iron. From Rome would come the final 10 kingdoms. But anyway, not yet, not there yet. That is the Roman Empire. The fourth beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong. Remember when we talked about that image that Nebuchadnezzar saw of a man, and we talked about those four metals, head of gold, silver, bronze, and then iron. And the point that we made, as we move down, that is, with each successive kingdom that would come, it would be more inferior. It would not have the greatness and authority and splendor, but it will become more powerful. The metals got harder and harder, from gold to silver to bronze to iron. And thus we can see here again how this relates to Rome of the vision of Nebuchadnezzar with this fourth beast. Notice being extremely strong and having large iron, see the word here, iron teeth, relates to that fourth kingdom. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with his feet. That is, the kingdoms that existed before it. It basically consumed them, and they became a part of the great Roman Empire. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And notice, went from the iron to now the 10 horns, representative in the dream of Nebuchadnezzar of the 10 toes. Remember the 10 toes of iron and clay, which are representatives of the 10 kingdoms that will come after. And so as we understand it, let me just give it now. We have these successive kingdoms, from Babylon to the Medes and the Persians, then to Greece, then to Rome, and then from Rome, we will have in the latter times, in the last days, the 10 toes, or here it talks about 10 horns. And horns are symbolic of kings and power, or kingdoms. And also, too, remember this. When we speak of kingdoms, basically kingdoms and kings are sometimes used synonymously. All right. But anyway, so now let's continue. Verse 8. While I was contemplating the horns, so the 10 horns on the back of this final beast. And remember what I told you about this fourth beast. We understand the fourth beast from Revelation chapter 13, somewhere around verses 2 and 3, that the fourth beast was a compilation of the 3 previous beasts: body of a leopard, feet of a bear, and the mouth of a lion. It's a combination of all of that. That's why Daniel, he just simply called it a beast, because he didn't know what it was. It was a combination of it all. And on that particular beast, there were 10 horns. This is what would later develop in time from out of the Roman Empire. And these 10 horns took Daniel's attention. While I was contemplating the horns, that's verse 8, another horn, little one, came up among them. Now, this little horn is speaking of the Antichrist. So you have what? 10 kings that will be ruling the world. Then all of a sudden, a little horn, by calling him a little horn, that means conspicuously the Antichrist arises. He's not with a lot of fanfare, but he arises in a small way, but what? He will become great. He'll become so great. Let's keep reading. What? Little one came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled up by the roots before it. This is the war that the Antichrist will have with 3 other kings. And thus he will destroy these 3 kings. The Antichrist will destroy 3 kings. And behold, this horn, that is the Antichrist, possess eyes like the eyes of a man, and the mouth uttering great boasts. Now, of course, we could speak at length about this, but it's simply saying the horn, representative of the Antichrist, having eyes, and the eyes is speaking of the wisdom, and we're going to talk about that too in chapter 8. The insight, intelligence, and wisdom. And this insight, intelligence, and wisdom, we'll find out, will be given by Satan himself to the Antichrist to aid in his rule. We'll see that in Daniel chapter 8. We also see that in Revelation chapter 13. His dominion was by the dragon, even though God ultimately allows and gives this, but nevertheless, it is the dragon, Satan, who is instrumental in bringing him to power and granting him, that is the Antichrist, Satan's own authority and much of his power. Okay, probably all of his power. But anyway, so this eyes of intelligence and the mouth uttering great boasts basically will speak of his blasphemies against Christ, against God of heaven, and even his boast in claiming to be God. And that is the whole point of the Antichrist. And that is the whole issue about all of these blasphemies. So he demeans the saints, he demeans Christ, and he calls and sets himself up to be Christ. Remember I said, now this is, we'll see in Revelation 13, for the most part, as a whole, he causes everybody to what? Worship him, to receive his mark, the number of his name, 666, the latter part of chapter 13. He sets up, that is, the false prophet of the Antichrist. He sets up that's the Holy Trinity. Let me just say it that way. I'm sorry. That is the demonic Trinity. Sorry, guys. Demonic Trinity. As we have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit for the Holy Trinity, there will also be a demonic Trinity. The Father, Satan himself, the Son, the Antichrist, and then the false prophet, as that which causes all to worship the demonic son. Okay, so there's that demonic Trinity. But anyway, and so we have this in chapter 13. But anyway, let me keep going here because I don't want to get too lost into chapter 13. As a matter of fact, I've already done a study in the whole entire book of Revelation. So search the channel and you should be able to find that video. So now we have these 4 great beasts that Daniel has seen in his vision. And all of these beasts depict the successive rise of the kingdoms from Babylon to the Medes and the Persians, to Greece, to Rome, and then those 10 horns that catch Daniel's attention, the final 10 kingdoms. And from out of the 10 horns, one will arise. This is the coming of the Antichrist as he speaks those boastful and blasphemous words. Continuing, and notice as Daniel is seeing these things, they also depict the chronological order of things and events that are happening. Verse number 9. So now we are in the time of the 10 kingdoms, the rise of the Antichrist. He has destroyed and conquered 3 nations and kings already. He is speaking. He is now rising to be the greatest of all. So we are in the period that we would call the period of the tribulation and even the great tribulation. All right. Now, I don't have time to get into a lot of eschatological events, but to give you a general snapshot, now we are in the church age. This is the church age. From the ascension of Jesus unto the rapture of the church, the snatching up of the saints. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. The dead in Christ and we who are alive. And also 1 Corinthians chapter 15 speaks of that. But nevertheless, that is the church age. After the rapture of the church, that will begin a period sometimes later of the tribulation. This will last for 7 years. It begins when the Antichrist, that's Daniel chapter 9, and I know we're not there yet, but it begins when the Antichrist signs a security agreement with some of the leaders of Israel. However, in 3.5 years, he will break the agreement, and this will begin the Great Tribulation. The Antichrist will turn on the saints, and we'll talk about that as we're moving on too. He's going to turn on the saints. He's going to turn on all Jews with the mindset, Revelation chapter 12, to kill all the Jews. That it will be in his mind the final resolution, kill all the Jews and also kill all Christians and everyone, back to Revelation 13, who refuses the mark of the beast to worship the beast, the Antichrist, as God, will be executed. Okay. So, and after this, in the Antichrist final mindset, now I'm in Revelation 19, mindset to kill all of the Jews gathering at the valley of Megiddo. That's why they call it Armageddon. There, looking to destroy all of the Jews, what happens will be the appearance of Christ from heaven, and it will be Christ who comes to destroy the Antichrist. Okay, that's the end of Revelation 19. So this is where we are now in Daniel 7 and 9. This is now preparing for the return of Christ to destroy that little horn that rose up, the Antichrist. I kept looking until thrones were set up and the Ancient of Days took his seat. So now we have entered into the judgment room of God. God is here. God the Father is being referred to as the Ancient of Days. His hair, the hair of his head like pure wool. His vesture was like white snow. Hair of his head was like pure wool. This speaks of the eternality of God, God's eternal self-existence. He always is. And also it speaks of the holiness of God, because we notice we're in the judgment room. So therefore God will judge in holiness and righteousness. He will judge these Gentile nations. But his throne ablaze with flames, its wheels were a burning fire. And this kind of gives a similar depiction of what Ezekiel saw in his vision. But the point is, it is a picture of judgment. A river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands were attending him. These are the holy angels of God who do his will. And myriads upon myriads were standing before him. That is an innumerable number of angels. The court was set, judgment, and the books were open, works. And this is what we see even in Revelation chapter 20. how when Jesus does the judging, he judges all according to their works. All right. But here it is the picture of the Father, but the Father is not per se judging men in the same sense of a human being, but he's judging nations. He's judging the beasts. You get it? But then, nevertheless, let's continue. Then I kept looking, verse 11, because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn were speaking. So notice we are still within that same time frame. The final days of the Antichrist. This is a picture of when the Antichrist is about to be judged. Again, Revelation 19. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and this is what we see at the end of chapter 19, that when Jesus does return, he kills both the Antichrist as well as the false prophet. They are both killed, and then after, now you guys got to catch this because I don't have time to get into it. After they are killed, they are then resurrected. All right, they are resurrected. The beast was slain. His body was destroyed. See, that's the death. And given to the burning fire. Now, even though it just simply sounds like he's dead and thrown into the fire, that's not the end of it. Okay, I really don't have time to get into it, but it brings into Isaiah chapter 14. What happens? Notice in Isaiah chapter 14 is talking about the king of Babylon. And the king of Babylon wants to be God, boasts and act as if he's God. That the king of Babylon is that spiritual picture here, Isaiah 14, of the Antichrist, Revelation 13 again, who is trying to make himself out to be God and to be worshiped as God, considered to be one of the greatest kings ever. That's that Isaiah 14 passage. That's where I am. And even though he thinks himself to be so great, he ends up killed and for a very short period of time goes into hell. This hell is Gehenna. This is the burning hell that people go to when they die. That is, the souls of men go to when they die. All right. However, the Antichrist, the point is in Isaiah 14, the people who are dead and in hell are amazed when they see the Antichrist. I cannot believe you here, of all people, you're supposed to be so great. You're supposed to be dead, and you are now dead and in hell. So that shows the vengeance of God when Jesus Christ comes and kills the Antichrist. However, the Antichrist does not remain dead. We see at the end of Revelation 19, he, as well as the false prophet, is cast into the lake of fire. In the lake of fire, there must be a body. Okay, let me say it this way, just in case. Okay, because I know a lot of people really don't understand it. Hell, Gehenna, that's the word that is used. When people die, like right now, our bodies go wherever it goes, but the soul goes to hell. That's Luke chapter 16. Remember about Lazarus and the rich man. The body goes wherever it is. It could be in the grave. It could be wherever, but it's the soul that goes into hell, Gehenna. All right. Now, after that, for it's never been the intention of God that the person, anybody should remain simply without a body. After that, there will be a resurrection, whether a righteous resurrection or an unrighteous resurrection. That is, righteous resurrection is what we see in Revelation chapter 20, the first 6 verses. This is called the first resurrection. Also, too, you can consider as well the rapture of the church. But we can't get into every detail because it'll be forever and ever. But in the resurrection, there is an immortal body. Everybody, whether you are a sinner or a saint, will have a resurrected, immortal body that cannot be destroyed. The saints will go to be with Jesus. The sinners will have resurrected bodies that will be consigned to the lake of fire. So I'm saying all of this to say, Gehenna is a place of torment, hell, for the souls of men. The lake of fire is a place of torment for the eternal body, souls, and spirits of men. All right. So the Antichrist at the coming of Jesus will be killed. His soul will then go to Gehenna, that is the hell where unsaved people go now. However, he will not be left in hell. The Lord Jesus will resurrect him. That's the end of Revelation chapter 19. And then consign his body, soul, and spirit to the lake of fire. And that's the key. For the lake of fire, what goes? Body, soul, and spirit. That's why we see at the end of Revelation chapter 20, in the great judgment day, everybody, all the dead are resurrected. But they are resurrected with the books open. Remember, like we are in Daniel here, with the books open to be sent to the lake of fire. That's why Revelation 20 says, hell gave up its dead, because the final destruction is not hell itself, where people die and go to right now. The final destruction is the lake of fire. And in the lake of fire, before that happens, there must be a resurrection. And that's what Revelation 20 is talking about in the second revelation. So I said all of that to make you guys understand the plight or plot of the Antichrist, and how he suffers at Christ when he is returned and killed, but is resurrected. He spends a short time in hell, but is resurrected and then finally sent to the lake of fire. And it will be the Antichrist and the false prophets who are the first people to go into the lake of fire, 1,000 years before Satan and anyone else goes there. But let me go back now. So I'm in verse number 13. He says, I kept looking. What? I'm sorry. I'm in verse number 11. So the Antichrist is now destroyed and given to the lake of fire. That's the resurrection, and then finally sent to the lake of fire. As for the rest of the beast, now he turns his attention back to the kingdoms of men. Their dominion was taken away. And this concludes the dominion of the Gentiles, the kingdoms of the Gentiles. Remember, I've been telling you about how the Gentiles will rule over and have influence over Israel and the Jewish people, blah, 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 tweety, tweet. So now we see an end to the kingdoms of the Gentiles. Their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. Life still will continue. There will still be kingdoms amongst the Gentiles, but it will not rule. None of those kingdoms will ever rule over Israel. It will be Jesus who rules over Israel, and Jesus who rules over the kingdoms of the Gentile world. This all is accomplished in the second advent of Christ. It is also referred to as the millennial reign of Christ. This again, we also see in Revelation chapter 20. 13. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man, and this is the Lord Jesus Christ. And notice too, it depicts too. Okay, I don't want to get into all of that, but notice by the title, the Son of Man, one of the favorite titles that Jesus liked to use for himself. And so therefore we should be able to see the apocalyptic nature of Jesus when he would use that title, even though he came at the first time as a lamb, he comes the second time as a lion. There's an apocalyptic nature to this term. He comes meek and low the first time, but the second time he comes with power and dominion. And we gather that from this section in Daniel. Son of Man, Jesus, and he came up to the Ancient of Days. So we see Jesus now coming before God, and he was presented before him. Much of this we can kind of see in a sense in Revelation chapter 4 and 5. Remember when there is a lamb who looked like he was slain for the foundation of the world, coming before the throne of God to open the seals, that is the revelation of all of the end times. But anyway, And to him was given dominion. So now finally we see Christ in his exalted state. This takes place during what we call the reign of Jesus Christ, that 1,000-year reign, Revelation 20. Glory and a kingdom. All peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. So now we see Christ being pictured as one who is the king of the world. He dominates all of the Gentile empires. All of the peoples of the world worship him. And thus we have also too the fulfillment of Psalm 2, right? But Psalm 2 is very intriguing because Psalm 2 not only depicts the rule of Christ, but it also depicts a final rebellion. And that relates also to Revelation chapter 20. Might as well tell you. When Jesus comes in the second advent, Revelation 20 tells us what? Satan will be placed in the abyss for 1,000 years. So the world that would assume also the demon angels also being there with him. But that assumes what? That the world has a chance to see Christ and to worship Christ without any demonic influence. After the 1,000 years, Satan is released. And once he is released, he goes to influence the Gentile, no Jew, not Israel, but the Gentile nations against Christ. And there is a final rebellion against Christ who is reigning on earth. And thus we have Psalm 2. Psalm 2 deals with the reign of the Son of God, and then the Gentile nations rebelling against the Son of God. So we can see that depiction in Revelation chapter 20. But anyway, I'm sorry, guys. Let me go back. So now we see the reign of Jesus Christ, verse 14. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away. That is, it's speaking of forever with respect to the set time. God has given us that set time. 1,000 years. And for that 1,000 years, nothing will be able to displace, nor the Gentile king, nor the Gentile ruler or power will be able to rival against the power of Jesus and his kingdom, which will not pass away. His kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. Okay. Now, since we've already given the interpretation, the remainder part of this chapter should be pretty good and pretty easy with just a few comments. Verse 15. So now Daniel desires to know what this dream and vision that he has of these four beasts mean, and he's now given interpretation, fundamental interpretation. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. So Daniel, what does this mean? I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. So there was an angel present in the vision, and Daniel just simply asked him what it meant. These great beasts, which are four in number, are four kings. Notice what I said to you earlier, how that kings and kingdoms are used synonymously. The four beasts representing four kingdoms, and he simply calls them here four kings, who will arise from the earth. Remember, again, he says the four winds stirring, that is the providence of God, the working of God, upon the sea, the sea representing humanity from the earth. What happens? But the saints of the highest one, so he now moves from, he doesn't get into the detail like I did, talking about from Babylon all the way up to Rome and the final 10 kingdoms, but he just goes from the 10 Gentile kingdoms, but the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come. So he didn't elaborate on those kingdoms. He just goes to all of that to the point and says, in the end, there will be the Lord will win. The saints of God who are persecuted. And we talked about that earlier, about how the Antichrist, Revelation 13 again, would try to cause everybody to worship him. Those who don't worship him will be killed. the saints will be killed by him, right? So the saints, but in the end, the saints will win. That's verse number 18. They'll receive the kingdom. That is the destruction of all of the Gentile kingdoms, the rise of the kingdom of Jesus Christ, and the saints. That's the first part of Revelation 20, who will be seated on thrones ruling the world under Jesus. The world would no longer be ruled by unsaved Gentiles. It would be ruled by Christ as the head of all things and the saints underneath him. Then I desired, 19, to know the exact meaning of the fourth beast. So what took Daniel's attention was that final kingdom and the final manifestation. Remember, from Rome, and even developing from Rome, the 10 toes and the 10 horns. 10 toes, 10 horns, synonymous. The fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron, its claws of bronze. Notice you can see the amalgamation of those kingdoms, iron and bronze. Remember that? Which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. So we see the fierceness, the aggressiveness, the ferociousness of the final world kingdom. And then the meaning of the 10 horns, and that is the final expression, 10 kingdoms that come out of the Roman Empire, that were on his head, and the other horn which came up, the 10 horns, the 10 kingdoms, 10 kings, the other horn that came up, the Antichrist, and before which 3 of them fell, he killed 3 of the kings, namely that horn. So notice what took Daniel's attention, the Antichrist. And it makes sense, because the Antichrist will be the worst leader the world has ever seen, one of the most powerful in the sense of the destructive nature, and he will be the most arrogant one of all. That horn, he says, verse 20, which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts. We've talked about that. He's wise, and the intellect of the Antichrist comes from the beast, and the mouth of great boasts, that is his boasting of being God and divine, which was larger in appearance than his other associates. And that is, notice, got 10 horns, then one comes up small. The small horn becomes really big, bigger than the other horns, which speaks of the greatness of the final king, the greatness of the Antichrist, right? Greater than any other king who ever lived with respect to ferociousness and power. I kept looking, and that horn, again, was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. This speaks also to, I think it's Revelation 13 and verse 7, I believe. God gives the Antichrist power to overcome the saints. It is in the will of God, the providence of God, the great 4 winds upon the sea. Okay, so this is not just simply happening, but God is allowing and even causing these events to happen. It doesn't remove responsibility from the Antichrist with all of the wickedness, but the point is, he couldn't do it without the permission from God to do it. And God has even spoken of it here. So he's waging war with the saints. And like Revelation 13 said, he'll overpower them up until the point, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one. And the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. So the Antichrist will have power over the saints for an appointed time. God has allowed this until the time God says, okay, time over for him. And this is the Revelation 19, when Jesus comes and destroys the Antichrist. And then we'll see in Revelation chapter 20, when there is a resurrection of the dead, and the saints will be given dominion and power. Thus he said, the fourth beast would be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which would be different from all other kingdoms. And notice there is basically amalgamation, if I can say it again, of the fourth beast and the 10 kings. So it's not with the fourth beast was never really conquered. He was like subdued in a way, subdued only to arise again in the sense of 10 kingdoms, right? But anyway, So the fourth beast is different from all the other kingdoms, devours the whole earth. That's important to understand. What? This will not simply be 10 kingdoms in Europe, but 10 kingdoms worldwide kingdoms, and tread it down and crush it. 24. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom, see it now, Rome never really destroyed, but subdued, only to rise again and become a spread of 10 worldwide kingdoms. The 10 horns out of his kingdom, 10 kings will arise. And after the 10 kings, what? Another will arise after them. So the Antichrist is 11, coming after the 10 kings of the world have been set up. So you can see kind of like a sectioning off of the world into 10 great, I don't want to say empires, but 10 great kingdoms with 10 men ruling over those kingdoms. And what? He will be different, that is the Antichrist, from the previous kings ones, and will subdue 3 kings. We've already talked about that. He will speak out against the Most High. We talked about that. That is his blasphemous words against God, against Christ, even against the saints. Speak out against the Most High, wear down the saints of the highest one. This is the dominion that the Antichrist will have in subjugating the saints, killing them, okay? And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law. I like that too. In other words, the Antichrist, he will rule and he will set his rule as the rule for the world. In other words, he won't be subject to anybody's rule. He is going to make his own rule and make his rules the rules for everybody to follow. That's why it says make alterations in times and in law. What you do, when you do, how you do, he wants to rule it all. And they will be given into his hands, that is the saints of God, and dominion will be given into the hand of the Antichrist. Notice, for a time speaks of a year, times 2 years, and a half a time. That is for 3.5 years. And so for 3.5 years, the Antichrist will rise to power, ruling the world, ruling those kingdoms of the world, destroying the saints, killing and murdering the saints, as well as the Jewish people. And this authority to do these things will be given to him for 3.5 years. And we see this particular number given in the book of Revelation a number of times. 42 months, 1,260 days, the 3.5 years that the Antichrist reigns, in a sense, supreme. But the court will sit for judgment. That is, the Antichrist, his days are appointed. God will judge him in the end, and he judges him through Jesus Christ. And his dominion will be taken away. That's Revelation 19, when Jesus returns to destroy the Antichrist, destroy the kingdoms of the final world kingdom at that time, and all the Gentile kingdoms will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms, Revelation chapter 20. That's the first part. Under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. Jesus comes, destroys the Antichrist, sets up his kingdom, and also the saints are given rule over the earth. His kingdom of Jesus, will be an everlasting kingdom. All the dominions will serve and obey him, the serving and worshiping of Jesus Christ by all the peoples of the world. At this point, the revelation ended. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly alarming me, and my face grew pale, and I kept the matter to myself. So Daniel was literally left in a state of amazement at this particular dream. All right. Whew. I knew that took a while, guys. So let me just simply sum it up in this way. Daniel has a dream. The dream is basically related to the vision and dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of a man head of gold, silver, and then you had the bronze, and then you had the iron, right? These represented the 4 kingdoms of the world, 4 kingdoms successively that should come, finally ending up in the 10 toes that Nebuchadnezzar saw. Daniel saw something similar. He saw beasts, but the beasts were one of the lion with the wings, and this was representative of Babylon. And then he saw the bear, representative of the Medes and the Persians. Then he saw the leopard with the 4 wings, representing Greece under Alexander the Great, and the rapidity by the which he became one of the strongest in the world at that time. And then following him, he saw this undescript beast making a part of all of those previous beasts. And this beast was representative of Rome. And then out of that, he saw on this beast the 10 horns, representing the similarity of the 10 toes that Nebuchadnezzar had on that particular statue that he saw, but the final 10 kingdom that should come. And then out of those horns, one inconspicuous little horn started to rise to power, to become really big and speaking blasphemous things and persecuting the saints. This was the rise of the Antichrist in the final days. And then all of a sudden, the courts were set. God had determined it was time for the judgment of the Antichrist, kind of similar to Belshazzar. He's been found wanting, and his days are also numbered. And then what happened? With that comes the return of Jesus Christ. Jesus is presented, the one like a son of man, before the ancient one, before God, and dominion and authority and power over all the kingdoms of the earth is given to him. So this is Christ receiving the kingdom from the Father, coming, Revelation chapter 19, to destroy the Antichrist. As that great mouth was, all of a sudden his life was ended. There is the killing of the Antichrist. Then that's Isaiah 14. Then there is the resurrection of the Antichrist, the end of Revelation chapter 19. Why? He is cast into the lake of fire along with the false prophet. And thus the kingdom of Christ, along with the reign of the saints, is given for the duration of the millennial kingdom. Now, let me say this one final point, and I'm going to end this. This is something else for you guys to remember. In the Old Testament, the prophets were never able to see beyond the kingdom, and thus they would always relate to the kingdom of Christ as being forever and ever. God gave them no further vision than the reign of the Messiah. So even here, as we see in Daniel, they say, what? The kingdom of the Messiah, there is no end. There's forever and ever. That's because God only gave them sight into the kingdom of Messiah. However, in the New Testament, what God does, even chronologically, as we see in Revelation chapter 20, he gives us the furtherance of it. That is, the kingdom of the Messiah, even though it will be extended 1,000 years, it will not be forever and ever and ever and ever. It lasts for 1,000 years. And after the kingdom of the Messiah, Revelation chapter 21, is the kingdom of God, Father, Son, and Spirit, and the eternal kingdom, which itself will be forever and ever and ever and ever, and different in nature than anything that has ever existed. The kingdom of the Messiah is going to be of this world, However, the kingdom of God, the one that follows after the reign of Jesus, Revelation chapter 21, I saw a new heaven and new earth, for all those former things had passed away. The kingdom of God will be different in nature than anything that has ever existed. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for your patience. I hope you enjoyed that particular teaching. Join me next time as we continue to explore some of the visions of Daniel in Daniel chapter 8. All right. See you next time.